Okay, so we're going live, and with that, Brenda, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, and thanks everyone for attending this afternoon. It's I'm quite blown away with the number of registrations. So I know how busy you all are. So let's make sure that you walk away with some good points from today's presentation. As Kirsten said, yes, we're going to have a look at the annual wage review and superannuation increase, as well as a number of legislative updates. Some of those legislative updates occurred in the last 12 months, but I just sort of want to recap for you so that you're aware of the huge amount of changes that we've seen with the new Labor government over the last sort of 2 years. There's been a lot of legislation that we've had to keep up with, but we know it's also difficult for you to keep up with it while you're running your businesses as well. So hopefully after today's presentation, you'll be a little bit more informed around what are your obligations as an employer. Just remember, though, with today's presentation, I'm just giving you a snippet of the changes. So if there's anything else that you need to know, I mean, obviously you can ask questions afterwards, but certainly get in contact with us directly. A lot of you, I think, on the line are already regulars in talking to us, which is fantastic. But yeah, certainly happy to pick up a call or an email after today's event as well. And we'll also make the slides available to everyone as well, so you've got those. So let's go into the first slide. I'm just going to make sure that, yes, good. I was having a little bit of trouble with my presentation earlier today, so this is looking good now. On Monday, the Fair Work Commission decided to increase the national minimum wage and minimum wages in all awards by 3.75%, and that's from the 1st of July or the first full pay period commencing the 1st of July, after the 1st of July. The updated Fair Work Commission pay guides relevant to awards, and I think there's possibly up to 5 awards that are relevant to some of your businesses, and the PACT calculator will be available from the 1st of July as well. If you are looking to calculate wages accurately, even if you're paying above award wage, just Google PACT calculator and the Fair Work PACT calculator will come up for you, and it'll guide you through the award, what classification you have to choose, and then it will tell you at the end what the hourly rate is that you have to pay as a minimum. So that way, if you're paying above award wage, you can check what you're paying against the award and know that generally there's probably quite a big gap between the two, which is always good to have. And obviously those guides will be available from the 1st of July as well. Sometimes we do find that the Fair Work Commission do make some adjustments to pay to hourly rates within awards during the year. So I always suggest go to the PACT calculator rather than relying on a pay guide that you might have downloaded a few months ago that could actually be out of date. But you can always Google pay guides and the latest one will come up for you. But just be aware that, sometimes some people are using old pay guides and that can get you into a lot of trouble. So the national minimum wage will increase from $882.80 a week or $23.23 an hour to $915.90 a week or $24.10 an hour. So if you're paying above award wages, as I said, always just go in and just do maybe a little sanity check a couple of times a year just to make sure that you are, because what we've found sometimes with some clients is that they might be paying, they've included the allowances in the on top of the hourly rate, then they're paying a combined hourly rate with an allowance, but then they might let a year or two go by and find that they've actually slipped behind and they have to make back payments. So you just don't want to get yourself into that particular situation. Moving on to superannuation increases, and thank you. I think we've got Tony from First Super on the line. So certainly if there are any super questions after the presentation, I'm sure that Tony will be very happy to answer them. But just confirming on the 1st of July again, superannuation guarantee contributions level increases by 0.5%. So moving from 11 to 11.5% contributions. And this will increase a further 0.5% from 11.5% to 12% on the 1st of July 2025. My understanding is that there is no plan to increase beyond the 12% for the following years, but we'll wait and see what happens there. The other important thing to remember too is on the 1st of July, the concessional, so before tax superannuation contribution cap, is increasing from $27,500 to $30,000 per person per financial year. And also on the same date, the non-concessional, which is the after-tax component, increases from $110,000 per person per financial year to $120,000. So just some really important points to remember about wages and superannuation. I wanted to cover off a few other things for you as well, just to talk about very quickly Fair Work compliance audits. I probably talked about this at the conference in March, but always good to just sort of keep this in the back of your mind. I think at the end of the day, if you're doing the right thing by your employees, you've got nothing to be concerned about. But Fair Work do target certain industries and certain states. They travel all around the country, and they don't make appointments. They just turn up, and then you're expected to comply with their requests, obviously. So some of the key things that they look for is making sure that you're keeping employee records for 7 years, that you're keeping the right information on those employee records, so that you've got payslip proof that you've provided pay slips, certainly within 1 working day of paying the wages, that you've got employment contracts in place, and that you've included the right information on pay slips as well. So I'm going to cover that off also. But just to give you an idea of what some of the infringement amounts might be, the fines that you might receive. So it could be $1,876 per breach per individual, and that would be the person that's usually associated with maintaining those records or even making payroll payments, and $9,390 per breach for a company. So just moving on to pay slips, and I know that, you know, most of you are using payroll systems that automatically populate pay slips, but there are things that you need to remember to just make sure that that the payroll system that you're using is actually demonstrating the right categories across the payslip. So obviously it's going to have your business name, it's going to have the employee's name, your ABN, what is the pay period if you're paying weekly or fortnightly, so those dates need to be there, as well as the date of the payment of the wages, and obviously the gross and the net amounts that are payable as well. So if you're paying an hourly rate, you must include the ordinary hourly rate and the number of hours worked at that rate. So it could be $35 an hour times 38 hours. The key thing to remember here too is a standard working week is 38 hours. It's not 37.5 and it's not 40 hours, which we typically find. And you could in the future have employees come back to you and say, well, I was only being paid for 37.5, but I was working a 38-hour week. I want back pay for half an hour for the last 6 years. Or I was working 40 hours, but I wasn't receiving overtime payments. So just be really careful in what your payroll system says. If you've got any queries like that, please, you know, feel free to give us a call and we can have a chat about that. Important thing to remember with casual loading and annual leave loading, you don't necessarily have to pay it separate on the pay slip, but you do have to mention, if you've included it in the hourly rate on the pay slip, you have to make mention of that on the pay slip. Any deductions, so any union deductions need to be included, including the name of the union and which account that's going into. Obviously, superannuation's got to be there as well. Whilst it's best practice to show leave balances on pay slips, it's actually not a Fair Work requirement. I personally think it should be. I think employees should be able to see their sick and their annual leave when they do get their pay slips, but it's not a requirement. So if you're not showing it on pay slips, you don't have to. However, if someone does ask you for their balance, you do need to provide it to them. Okay, I wanted to cover off overpayments as well, because a lot of employers, I think, are under the impression that if I accidentally overpay an employee, I can just recoup that money in the next pay, and that's all good. Well, you actually need to get written permission from the employee to deduct any overpayments from their next pay. Now, depending on how much that amount is, if it's a large amount or if it's, you know, if it might have been a small amount over a period of time and you're asking them to pay it back, I think be mindful of maybe their financial position as well as the that needs to be paid back. So it might be that you come to an arrangement where they pay it back in instalments over a period of time. So just be mindful that any overpayments, you must receive written permission from the employee to deduct from their next pay or future pays. Family and domestic violence, I think, is a really important one to cover off as well. You cannot show leave balances of paid family and domestic violence leave on a payslip. You can't have that as an option for staff to use as, you know, in their leave menu. It must be shown as ordinary hours or some other sort of payment on their wages. I would recommend you just have it as ordinary hours. Hopefully none of you will have to deal with family and domestic violence, but if you do, I would imagine it would be on a very rare occasion. And just remember that it's also full-time, part-time and casual employees are entitled to paid family and domestic violence. So if a part-time employee works Wednesday from 2 till 5 and they have to take that 2 till 5 off, they get paid for that day. Same with the casual if they're rostered on Friday between 10 and 4 and they need to take that day off for family and domestic violence leave, they must be paid for that shift that they weren't able to work. Unfair dismissal claims. I also wanted to just cover off this process with you as well. I think it's really important that you please talk to us if you want to terminate an employer, even if you think it's an easy termination. Sometimes they can become quite complicated and then you could end up with an unfair dismissal claim coming across your desk. So you just need to really exercise diligence and fairness and when you're dismissing an employee. Fair Work Commission will look at a termination and say, was it unjust, unfair or unreasonable or unlawful? And it's always on the employer to prove otherwise. The onus is on you as the business to prove that it wasn't an unfair dismissal claim. Terminated employees have 21 days to file their application, but Fair Work are quite lenient with that and they will take into account the stress of the termination and may accept applications beyond the 21 days. Just make sure you also have the right policies and procedures in place and make sure that employees sign or at least acknowledge in some way that they've read and understood them. And I'm not saying have a whole raft of policies and procedures. I mean, obviously on the FTMA portal, there's the HR portal there's lots of documents for you to download and they're to no cost to you. But just make sure you've got the basic policies in place, particularly around health and safety and appropriate workplace behaviour as well. Employers must have sufficient evidence. As I said, the onus is on you to take action against an employee. It can't just be an assumption or a hunch or even hearsay from someone. You've got to actually have proof. So if you're not sure, obviously give us a call. But I just wanted to take you through one case study that I came across not so long ago where a worker had gone out with a number of co-workers and had consumed a lot of alcoholic drinks that evening. The next day he didn't report for work at 7 a.m, but he did arrive at 7:30 after being contacted by the employer. The other co-workers told the employer that they believed he would still be intoxicated the next day when he arrived at 7:30 a.m, and they made an assumption that he was under the influence of alcohol, and they terminated him. They did not ask him to do an alcohol test, a breathalyzer test or anything like that, and hence, when this case went to Fair Work, the worker was awarded lost wages of $4,500 plus super, because the Fair Work Commission found that they didn't have any evidence they didn't provide any evidence to demonstrate that when the worker attended work, they were actually under the influence of alcohol. This was a heavy engineering business, so obviously they were extra cautious, but they still needed proof. This worker also could have asked to be reinstated, but they didn't, and so they separated. But you need to be mindful too that some terminated employees will actually seek to be reinstated to their previous role. They may not necessarily be asking for monetary award. Contractor versus employee. I may have covered this one off at the conference as well in March, but just really important to remember, 26th of August, which is just around the corner, Fair Work Commission is really going to be starting to look at the relationship between the contractor and the employer. Really important to remember that there has to be a very clear delineation between an employee and an employer. So are they able to delegate the work or subcontract it out, or are you telling them they can only work for you? How much control over how their work is performed? What's the financial responsibility and risk? Do they have to have their own insurance policies, or are you covering them? Are you providing their tools and equipment, or are they providing that? Hours of work as well. Usually a contractor has flexibility in terms of the hours. They can work on a weekend provided they get the job done by a particular date. Is there any expectation of work continuing? Who makes tax and superannuation payments? And leave. A contractor does not receive paid leave. It's interesting, so many times we've seen that relationship, the employer has said, no, they're a contractor, but they've accrued some leave in some cases, and they've even paid superannuation. So just be really mindful that that is coming in on the 26th of August, and Fair Work Commission will want to make example of businesses, obviously. Paid family and domestic violence leave was effective the 1st of Feb, and I know we've kind of already touched on this, but I just also wanted to remind you that the leave renews on each employee's work anniversary date, so it doesn't accrue. 10 days at the very beginning when people start with you, or when, you know, when this came into effect on the 1st of February, 10 days, but it does expire, but they just get another 10 days. So please note that it doesn't accrue and it's not paid out on termination of employment either. And obviously, before I said, you know, for privacy reasons, please do not let this show on any employee's payslip. And obviously, if you do feel like you need to ask for evidence that the individual is dealing with family and domestic violence, please, you can ask them. But in the odd occasion where we've seen it, the employers have trusted the employee and have not asked for that evidence. But you can actually ask for that. Just wanted to cover off some of the other legislative changes that we've seen since December 22. Obviously, pay secrecy, can't have that in any new employment agreements. If it's in current employment agreements, that's fine, but no new employment agreements, and employees are free to discuss their wages should they choose to. Obviously, there's a lot of protected attributes under the Fair Work Act, but they've added breastfeeding, gender identity, and intersex status as well. Job advertisements must include the right pay rates. I haven't actually seen any employers advertising at the wrong rate, but it must include the appropriate pay rates that come under an award or an enterprise agreement. Sexual harassment, obviously, we know that it's been prohibited in the workplace for a very long time, but there are now fines for $66,000 for businesses and $13,200 for individuals as well. So, and you also need to demonstrate that you have a policy in place and that you've actually trained employees and managers on appropriate workplace behaviour. So it's no longer, you know, enough to just have the policy. Extending unpaid parental leave. I think the difference here now is really that you've always been able to extend up to 2 years. That's if the business can cope with somebody being away for 2 years. But this now gives the Fair Work Commission the power to deal with disputes as well. And flexible working arrangements now includes family and domestic violence. So employers must be flexible when it comes to an individual asking to take time off for family or domestic violence. Generally, we know that family and domestic violence has to be taken. It's never advance notice. Usually it's not advance notice anyway, so it would have to be taken almost immediately. Small claims process, that came into effect on the 1st of July last year. This means that employees can go to the Fair Work Commission and ask for back wages. The maximum used to be $20,000. Now it's $100,000 for recovering unpaid employee entitlements. Not sure if you've got fixed term contractors in your business, but if you do, you can't extend them beyond 2 years. There are some exceptions with government roles that are generally advertised for 3 to 5 years, but in most workplaces now, you cannot extend for 2 years. And there is also a fixed term contract information statement that also must be provided now.
Brenda, sorry, could you just explain that a little bit further about the fixed term contracts?
Yes. So if you had somebody in, say you wanted to hire someone for, say, a 9-month period, you can extend them only once and you can extend them to 2 years, but you can't extend them beyond 2 years. And this, I think, is what the reason this has come in is to ensure that employers are not employing someone on a fixed term contract when they really should be full-time permanent staff. So they're just trying to ensure that people are bringing on staff at the right employment status, if you know what I mean. So, you know, think about what the role really looks like. Is this going to be an ongoing role, or is this a particular skill that my business needs that is really hard to find, and maybe I can actually just do that one for a fixed term period. But yeah, you can only extend once. We've seen it happens a lot in call centres. Obviously, a lot of people in call centres are on fixed term contracts, but you typically see in those organisations where they're offered a year and then they're extended for another year, then they're extended for another year. So there's no real sense of ongoing employment, I guess, by that employee, and even though they are long periods of time. Does that kind of make sense, Kirsten?
Yep, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. New discrimination protection, so stronger protections for employees experiencing family and domestic violence. That came in December last year. That means you can't take adverse action against an employee who needs to take that leave, and that means dismissing them, obviously. Union officials no longer are required to hold a Fair Work entry permit to enter a workplace. This is if they're assisting a workplace health and safety representative. So if the OH&S rep has been trying to get the attention of the employer for some time about a risk in the business, the employer's not doing anything about it, this just makes it so much easier for the OH&S rep to actually just get the union in immediately without any sort of paperwork, which is a good thing. Changes to casual employment. Obviously, we've had casual conversion in for some time. There's also the casual information statement from Fair Work as well. But now what Fair Work are actually going to look at is really just like that contractor-employer relationship. They're going to look at the real substance and the practical reality and the true nature of that relationship. So we see this very much so in the building and construction industry, where they're constantly having full-time casuals who just roll over year after year. In a lot of those cases, those individuals are happy being casuals because they've got 25% leave loading. However, they're missing out on leave entitlements. So again, this is the Fair Work Commission's way of trying to ensure that you're employing people under the right employment status. And January next year, we will see criminalising wage underpayment. So this is about employers who intentionally, rather than accidentally or inadvertently, underpay staff. So they could face up to 10 years in prison and a maximum fine of $7.825 million. Obviously, that's for pretty big businesses, and that would be a pretty severe case to see anything like that happen in terms of prison and a maximum fine of that large amount. And finally, just the right to disconnect, I suppose, that's coming into play on the 24th of August this year. So again, not far away. That's for businesses with 15 or more employees, and then it kicks in a year later for small businesses of 14 or less employees. And this just really gives employees the right to ignore out of office phone calls, texts and emails, of course, unless they're on call and they're being paid to be on call. But I think it's just trying to stop those businesses that think that they can connect with their employees, in the evening or on a weekend. I had a question the other day around, well, what about reasonable additional hours that people work? And I think, certainly you'd think that would be probably from, say, 8 o'clock in the morning or maybe 7 in the morning till maybe no more than 7 o'clock at night. And certainly not on weekends. But I know it's really hard for any of us to really disconnect with everything being on our mobile phones. But and I think most employers are very respectful anyway. So hopefully that won't be an issue for your business.
Brenda, I've got a question there about how often do staff and managers need to be trained in harassment and bullying? Is there an actual time?
No, there isn't an actual time. And I think I would say 1 to 2 years, but if you're finding that there's an issue in your business, then maybe you might need to do it a little bit more often. But I would also then say, let's address the issue. Why are you having issues in the business? So let's have a look at why. But I would say just in general terms, probably every 2 years, I think is good, unless you're seeing a lot of turnover in your business, maybe once a year then. Yeah.
Thanks.
No worries. Any other questions?
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, you can either put your hand up, type it in the Q&A or the chat, and if you put your hand up, if I can work it out, I'll unmute you. So, questions. So I think that like the one that people I've got. Oh no, I've got that one. So in regards to that right to disconnect. So if you have to call your employees, it's only if it's over and above. All these rules, correct me if I'm wrong, are only if you go over and above. If you really abuse it, if it's occasionally, you're not going to have somebody come and whack you over the back with a big stick. It's only if you abuse the system. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. I mean, I had an example recently where employees were being texted at 6:30 in the morning, and there was an expectation that they would answer those text messages, and that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
But on the odd occasion where there's an emergency, I even know sometimes, if I'm on leave, somebody might not be able to find something, they'll just shoot me a quick text. Do you mind? And people don't mind, but if it's a constant basis and it's actually interfering with your personal life, then it's a problem.
Yeah. And there's a question saying that you said 4 times in 38 hours. How does that work for salary employees? Is there a different expectation and ruling around that?
No, everybody across the board in Australia, whether you're on an enterprise agreement, whether you're covered under award or you're not an award employee, 38 hours is a standard working week. But with people that are on annual wages, there's generally a clause in their contract that says additional hours. It's expected that you work additional hours for no extra cost, generally because you're being paid well above any award rates anyway. And you need to work that out as an employer and employee in terms of what that would be. I would say no more than 5 hours a week is reasonable to me. Anything above that, and I would say that you'd need to keep that Monday to Friday. I wouldn't expect reasonable additional hours to be on a weekend either. Yeah, so just make sure you separate that out.
Yeah. And it's important for members. I have put in the chat line there. When you go onto the HR portal, you will see that you've got the free PMA line. So would you like to explain about the PMA line and how people can contact you via that? And maybe just some examples of what people have contacted you about, because there's been a really good uptake from members engaging Gabby and Brenda. So would you like to explain that, Brenda?
Yeah, the PMA line, People Matters Advice line, is a free service for all of you, and it's unlimited email and phone advice that you might need. And I have to say that FTMA members, out of all the associations we deal with, we've had the biggest uptake and the most. You seem to be a group of members that really want to do the right thing by your staff, and that blows us away.
Best industry, yeah, definitely.
I definitely think so, and I'm not exaggerating at all. I mean, Kirsten gets the monthly reports. She knows how many transactions we have, and what we provide to FTMA. You can be rest assured that privacy is of the utmost importance. So what we provide is just the member business name, whether it was a HR, workers' comp or OH&S query, and if it was a phone call or an email. And that's all we provide, and state that you're from, as well. But we've had things such as leave entitlement, somebody's run out of sick leave, are they allowed to use their annual leave? That's been one of the queries. We've had things around company vehicles. One member was providing a company vehicle. The person they changed their role, so they no longer required a company vehicle. So there was a little bit of backwards and forwards of they still wanted to keep the car. They were using the car for personal use as well, driving hundreds of kilometres, using the fuel card for their partner's car, really taking advantage of the situation. So really good for us to be asked those kind of questions, because we can guide you through it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can call us on that subject only once. You can ring us as many times. I had a call the other day around, I guess, inappropriate images being sent from a male employee to another female employee of a sexual nature. So I told that member, let's have a chat today, and sort of guided them on the next steps. But I said, if you need assistance again, ring me back again. So we're here for the long haul kind of thing. It's not just, we've dealt with that, you can't come back about that, because people problems can be very, very complicated, and they can take a period of time to actually resolve. So don't feel bad about ringing us. It doesn't bother us whatsoever how many times you call or how many times you email. It's not an issue at all.
And I think it's important for FTMA members. We've had a few members that were members of, for example, EmploySure, paying nearly 15 grand or more a year. And the feedback from them who have been using the service is saying they've dumped their 15 grand a year with EmploySure and using the service, and they're getting actually better response. We've had some members who wanted to go to 4 days a week, go to Brenda and talk about, okay, what do we need to do as a business to go through this? Now, if there's more work that you want to engage Brenda and Gabby, of course, there will be charges if you want them to do additional work for you. But I think at the moment that the work that is being done and the feedback from members, not only is it really professional service, but the timeliness of the response from Brenda and Gabby has been spectacular. So if you haven't used the line or logged onto the HR portal, it's important that you know that we've got employment contracts for full-time, part-time and casual for the timber industry, ward clerks and the road and transport distribution. In the first week of July, Fair Work don't actually put out the new exact rates until the 1st of July. Is that correct, Brenda?
Yes. Yep, you have to wait until the 1st.
Yeah, so the updated, so Brenda and Gabby will do the updated awards, which will show all the usual things about all the different allowances and the wage rates, and also a ready reckoner, so you can compare compared to the work that they're doing. So that will be out in that first week of July.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, we should be able to get our hands on it on the 1st of July, and then we'll shoot it across to you to upload onto the portal. So, you know, just give us a few days to get that done, and it'll be there for you.
Wonderful. So is there any more questions from anybody? Otherwise, Brenda, as usual, fantastic information. I will send around these slides. So Brenda, if you could flick them over to me.
Yep.
We will send them around. We will send the recording. Won't be to next week because I have no idea how to do it. And as you all know, Nikita's finished and she's away at the moment. So when she comes back next week, I'll get her to show me how to do it. And I'll send out the recording on Monday. I am slowly learning. But we will send around the amazing presentation that Brenda had, because I'm sure there's a lot of you that look at it and go, oh shit, I don't do that, or I didn't realise that. And it's really a timely matter to go through and just check yourself to make sure that you're doing the right thing. But otherwise, absolutely brilliant stuff. FTMA cannot be happier with the relationship with HRAnywhere, and we won't be dumping it for a long time. So please have confidence that we'll have your back, just like Brenda and Gabby will.
And thanks for the comments, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.
See ya.